Let us reconvene. We don't have much time, and what we want to do now before lunch is to look at some of the key points of Tillich's understanding of the struggle of the individual for selfhood. And let's start out with his understanding of alienation and estrangement in human experience. There's the good news and the bad news, right? The good news is that there is no way at the ontological level in his thought that you can separate yourself from the power of being, really. That is, no matter how much in despair you are, no matter how chaotic you are, no matter what a total mess you are still connected to the fountain. You just may not be able to access it in a useful way, a life-serving way. So the good news is, contrary to what you may feel or think, you're still plugged in to the primordial fountain of being, and you have access at the greatest depth to what you need for life. You have access to it in principle. It's there. You may have insufficient awareness, consciousness, to be able to draw on it creatively. And if you become a philosopher, from this point of view, an adequate philosopher will become awake about those things, and it will be reassuring. The bad news, though, is that as a human being, you are always going to have a feeling, a lot of the time, you're going to have a feeling, and it's going to tend to lead you to think that you're alienated from it. In other words, the human mind will tend to feel estranged from all of that power of being, because we experience, we know that we could be better. We know that we could be more loving. We know that we could be more calm. We know that we could have more courage. We know that we could be more just than we are when we're at our most conscious. So that reality in human experience, does that mean if I have the best analyst in the world that I'm still going to experience estrangement? Absolutely. The most, you can have 10 of the best psychoanalysts of all the different schools. Go through all of the wonderful Gestalt experiences and so forth and so on. And you could even go to journal workshops. And as helpful as all of those things would be, you're human, you're going to experience existential estrangement and alienation from your essence. Not all the time, but you will experience that. That's the bad news. And the really dangerous thing, of course, is that if you don't think well, if you're not conscious, if you're not aware, if you don't think well, see, this is about the practical side of philosophical analysis. If you don't think well, you will come to the conclusion that that's the most important thing about you. That is, what we say, you're focusing on it half empty or 2/3 empty. It's not, you don't say to yourself, well, this is coming from somewhere. Even my 3rd glass, or my 4th of a glass, or my 10th of a glass, that's coming from somewhere. As I like to say to people, there must be a pony in there somewhere. If you don't know that story, I'll tell it to you later. But okay, so that's the good news and the bad news, and that is the story of all this. Now let's get it much more detailed. Because you're going to have this ontological feeling of estrangement because you're human. And it's going to be with you a lot. With me, especially first thing in the morning, right? Or Fridays. I experienced existential estrangement a lot on Fridays, waiting for the weekend. But anxiety tends to break. At root, it is all grounded in estrangement, which is grounded in the human condition. All forms. But there are distinctive forms of anxiety that Tillich treats in The Courage to Be. If you study that carefully, if you keep studying that Courage to Be, that probably is the single best book to study to begin an entree into Tillich's thought, because it assumes all of this stuff. If you know what we're talking about today, you can go back to that book and read between the lines, and you'll see the ontology, the ontological structure behind what he says. Okay, so first type of anxiety. There are three types of anxiety that anxiety will tend to split into in different people at different times. Now, at root, they're all together. They all go together in estrangement. And if you're really at a terrible place in your life, you may say, yeah, to each one. I know that one, I know that one, I know that one. But others of you will notice as we go through these that you may experience one very powerfully and not experience the others much at all. So let me run through these, and then I'll try to take a question or two on that, and then I'll talk about the forms of courage, and then we'll have a little discussion, and then we'll take our lunch break. I need to talk a little bit about the theory of the self, which is very important too. All right, first, the fate and death. A person experiencing the anxiety of fate and death, you might say they're really thinking a lot about the destiny pole. I'm a human being and I'm going to die. And the fact that I'm a human being and I'm going to die looms so large for me that it sucks the energy out of my life. I'm so aware of death or aging, for those of you that are over 40. Just wait till you get over 50. Yeah, that's right. If you wait till you get 60. But gradually, that fate and death reality, that if you're not into your grandiose manic defense, staying up over above all the manure, you're up here. I'm not going to die. It's like, I have an unlimited amount of time to fix my relationships. I have an unlimited amount of time to complete my creative projects, to travel. And but when you're experiencing the anxiety of fate and death, you have seen through that mirage. You know you do not have an unlimited amount of time. You know you're a finite creature, and though you participate in the power of being, it is hard for you to tell yourself that helps. If you're really assailed by the anxiety of fate and death, Robert Moore could talk to you about, you're connected to the power of being. And you'd be saying, yeah, but I'm going to die. And so, in other words, that's where you get into despair. If you're having a lot of trouble with despair, which means you can't really, it just all seems so overwhelming that it's almost impossible for me to act or to choose or to try to build a life or try to build a relationship. You follow that? A lot of that may be, in fact, people that are very depressed often are tremendously, at some level, aware of that anxiety, fate, and death. I've wasted my life. Good God, I'm already X age, and I haven't achieved. Think of what Mozart had done by the time he was, and look at what I haven't done. See, that's the way you think when you're assailed by the anxiety of fate and death. Or, I was born a blank, fill in the blank. I was born a blank. And you know what? I never had a chance. you know. Or, you know what, I had this blank health problem, and I never had a chance, you know. Dear friend of mine just has had a very severe stroke, and I know that he's being assailed right now by this. I know he's being assailed by it. Okay. You may have a great sense of meaning. See, you may have that, and have a great sense that if you didn't have this, you got plenty of meaning. There's lots that I want to do. So my life is not unmeaningful in the sense of my life, but I'm going to die. So that quashes that. Okay. But emptiness and meaninglessness is a different kind of thing. A lot of the time, it doesn't really focus directly on fate and death at all. When you're experiencing the anxiety of emptiness and meaninglessness, you just have this sense of what they used to call ennui. Nothing matters. I can't even get excited about my death. I am bored with the idea of my death. I am bored with the idea of my life. There's no energy in it. See, when you're experiencing this anxiety of emptiness and meaninglessness, you got a problem on the dynamics pole. You don't have a sense of life fountain energies coming in that makes things fascinating. Think about what we used to say about libido. It's a lot of different things, and I hope to teach a course on psychic energy sometime soon. Because of all these studies, I've gotten renewed interest in psychic energy because it's existentially enormously relevant. And one of the things is libido. One of the things that even the Freudians had a sense for. If you have libido available, things are interesting. They may be so interesting you can't stand it and have to drink yourself stupid. But if you got libido present, you're interested. You don't have a problem with a sense of emptiness and meaninglessness. You may have a problem with too much meaning, too much fullness. If you're a person that has a tendency toward addiction of any kind, that's more your problem. You know, it's not really so much about fate and death. You've got an overflow of meaning, overflow of all kinds of energies, and then you don't have enough centeredness in the self to contain it, so you have to shut it all down in depression, or contain it through addiction. Okay. So this thing is very flat, very little affect. You don't even get up for being afraid. And if you're really there, this is why a person is really depressed. They're not afraid of death. Sometimes it really looks like a good option. Not that you got enough energy to choose it, right? Because it's kind of hard to commit suicide if you're really assailed by this, because you just can't get the energy to do anything. That's why we say as clinicians, you're not too worried about somebody suiciding if they have that much flatness. What you got to worry about is when they get a little energy. When the energy starts to come back, that will be when they'll try to kill themselves. You follow that? Okay. So that's just a big black hole experiencing the void, and it just sucks the meaning out of life. And so that's a way to understand philosophically a lot of depression, a lot of just really, really powerful depression. Depression that seems to have no object. You know, if the depression has an object, I'm sick, or I'm dying, or there's a major loss that I can't control, it would be more this. But those really, really, really serious depressions, the ones that you don't care if anybody leaves or not. See, you don't care if you die or not. That's this one. And then the third, the anxiety of guilt and condemnation. This one is when you feel so much, you feel your own transgressions, your responsibility for your own transgressions or shortcomings. So in other words, if you feel, for example, I look back in my life and I had such gifts, and what have I done with them? I've been a lousy steward of my life. I had some musical talent, but I quit the lessons, or I was once in this relationship with this wonderful person, but I blew it. See, most of the time we talk about how it was their fault. See, if you can manage to keep talking about how it's all everybody else's fault, then you can lower the amount of guilt and condemnation anxiety you feel. But if you start doing shadow work, as we like to say, you start doing shadow work, and you're not just working on your golden shadow, although that's hard to work on too. I mean, it's hard to work on your golden shadow, but if you're working on that, what Robert Bly calls ashes, start eating some ashes about your life. This is where Edinger in that book, Ego and Archetype, he talks about getting down there where you have some humility. And that is necessary to empty that cup of the self so that the great self can put something new in there. But you got to get down there to start acknowledging how you screwed up. Well, it's important, as Edinger says in that book, a wonderful book. If you hadn't read it, read it, Ego and Archetype. I recently gave some lectures that should be available soon on Edinger's Ego and Archetype. But it's one thing to have enough confrontation with the ashes in your life. That's not this. That's liberating from your grandiosity. If you accept your role in the mess you made of your life, that can liberate you from your grandiosity so that you can actually claim that as an initiation and go into a new place with some new energy. But this is when you take, we're always good at taking good things and turning them demonic. Humans specialize in that. We take an important thing and then we exaggerate it and make it serve death. So this is when you're aware of your shortcomings, but you get what Jungians call a negative inflation. And that's when you magnify the negativity in you and in your past and in your past decisions so that they fill the whole screen. And you can't say, but I survived. But I keep trying. Say, I've been divorced and remarried 6 times. Now, if I've really got this guilt and condemnation, I may be thinking, God, I just ought to kill myself. If I had enough self-esteem, I'd kill myself. See? But then I'm worried about what would happen. Maybe there's a moral order in the universe. If I commit suicide, I'm going to have more guilt and condemnation. See? But anyway, if you were taking the forces of life and being against the forces of death and non-being, you'd say, yeah, I've been married 5 times or 6 times, but the power of being in me keeps me trying. I'm still trying to connect. I'm still trying to find a relationship that is more life-giving than death serving. I'm trying to be more of a life giver in relationship than a death server in relationship. And if you've ever worked with people that have had this experience, it's really, I tell you, I'm very touched by the human, this fountain, the way it keeps on flowing. Because the truth is that people try. And that's that courage to be coming in. That's that courage to be coming in. Okay, that gets us to courage. According to Tillich, this has been one of the most important themes in the history of philosophy and religion. And in that Courage to Be book, he gives you this wonderful summary of the history of philosophy on courage. And like you say, you have to read that again and again and just take time with it, and you'll see what he's saying. He's saying different philosophers in different periods of the history of philosophy have understood the importance of courage, and they've tried to ground it different ways. And he goes into the ancient philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy, and the way in which early on courage was seen as a warrior virtue. I was stunned. I looked back and I thought, my God, he knew about this warrior energy long before I did. And in fact, if you take that book and you read the origins of courage in warrior culture, knight and chivalric culture, then that anticipates a lot of things I've said about warrior energy in life and its importance. Because this is the realm of the warrior energy, courage. But anyway, then he goes into the source of courage in Nietzsche and the philosophers of life. Those people that say life is the important thing, forget ethics. All those people that are trying to get you to be good are trying to kill you. That's Nietzschean, see. And you know what? There's some truth in it. There's some truth in it. This is what Tillich means when he says that you've got to really be careful about moralism. Because there's a lot of difference between morality and moralism. In moralism, they'll try to shame you for being human. And they'll try to shame you and envy and hate you for all of the life force in your life. And if you don't watch it, they will guilt trip you so much, and they'll try to shame you for your creativity, and they'll hate you for the goodness in you, and they'll tell you they're hating you for the badness. But the key is that they hate you, and they want you dead. And so Nietzsche is not altogether wrong. And Tillich understands that. He says, yes, hear this Nietzsche and the way it went bad among the Nazis, because they kept saying, if you listen to these people that are trying to make you moral, see, that's a Nazi philosophy. If you're really going to be a grown man, you're going to be able to kill your favorite puppy and not feel a thing. That was part of the initiation for the SS troops. And Tillich says, you got to understand it's important to affirm life force, but you must not go the Nazi way. And so if you affirm the life force above everything else, you will tend to become nihilistic. So that was one of his things. The other thing he went into a number of these other things. You should look back at it. But he's talking about the different ways of grounding courage. And he talks about the secular atheistic existentialist and the attempt to ground your courage in your personality and your stand, like Sartre. And Tillich always admires what humans try to do. He's not moralistic. He admires Sartre and Camus, you know. But he's interested in results. He wants you to be able to have courage. And as we'll see this afternoon, he doesn't believe you can ground your courage in your ego. The atheistic existentialists believe that you can just reach in there and get courage right out of your ego, out of your personality. Well, some folks may be able to do that, but it's rare. And in those cases, according to Tillich, even when they can do it, they don't understand where their courage is really coming from. Because for Tillich, that courage isn't coming from the ego. It's coming from there. They just don't know it. Does that mean you can participate in the power of being and not know where it's coming from? Absolutely. All the time. Your vitality comes from the power of being. Does it come whether you know it or not? Yes. So it's a transcendent ground. Your courage always has a transcendent ground whether you know it or not. Tillich says, you gotta get it. Your courage to be is grounded in something much greater than you. And it's very important for you to understand that, or you will be, as Jungians would say, very inflated. And you will be riding for a fall. See? Because you will get to the point where you will see through your own ego, yeah.
From what you're saying, I'm getting into resonance where Joseph Campbell uses the word consciousness.
Yes.
Would be the same.
Yes. And the importance of consciousness is enormous here today. The whole day is about the importance of consciousness and what you're conscious of. And so Tillich would say that anybody that has courage is getting it from the same place. It's not the ego. It's not the I. Even if you think it's the I, it's not the I. And if you had adequate philosophy, or if you had adequate theology, or if you had adequate spirituality, you would know better. And it would help you avoid the pitfalls that are going to come if you think your courage comes from the I. Is that Tillichian? Absolutely fundamental. Is that Jungian? Absolutely fundamental. That's where they connect. Now let me go into these two different types and I'll just open it up for a few minutes. Two kinds of courage. Equally difficult, but not equally difficult for every person at every time. There is the courage to be as a part, not apart, but the courage to be as a part of a larger whole. And the second form, the courage to be as oneself in tension with the larger whole. Two forms of courage. A centered self, for Tillich, has both. In order to be a centered self, which is for him the goal, a centered self is not one that is more isolated. A centered self is one that has the ability to maintain its sense of selfhood while changing appropriately and creatively and being able to reflect consciously on one's selfhood and the struggles of one's selfhood. So that self-identity, the capacity for self-identity, the capacity for self-alteration, the capacity for self-transcendence. And all of you clinicians and all of you people in analysis, you know that you've got a struggle on your hands of coming to a sense of centeredness and integration. You've got a struggle on your hands to have the courage to change as appropriate and creative. And you've got a struggle on your hands to become conscious. And if you're in analysis, you know how hard it is to become conscious. And if you're a therapist and you're awake, you know how hard it is to be conscious as a therapist. Because the great cloud of not knowing keeps coming back insistently. Okay, so if you're going to be a centered self and be able to do these things, you have to have both kinds of courage. Why is that? Well, think about this as an ontological tension. If you don't have enough participation with others, you will be so anxious you won't be able to individuate. Others, good relationships contain you. They help contain you. They're not enough for spiritual practice. But if you don't want to be crazy, you better be working on optimizing relationships. So, it's not that relationships are against your individuation. They are part of the necessary framework for your individuation. And as you become more centered self, you will learn to love more. You'll be able to love more. And you will want to be in relationship the more centered you get. You'll love the whole world more. In fact, it's amazing. This is a whole philosophy of love. You could say this is an erotic philosophy. Tillich's whole thought, you cannot understand it all if you don't understand the role of eros and the erotic. In fact, if you really get to be a centered self, you remember that I had ecstasy right up there? You're going to be getting closer and closer to trying to live in the presence of ecstasy and the erotic as much as possible, leading to as much joy as you can have as a human being. How much joy can you have as a human being? From Tillich's point of view, depends on how centered you can get. Because if you can get really centered as a self, you will be able to really have the courage to be as a part, and you'll be able to love. Not perfectly, but you'll be able to love. And you won't be so perfectionistic that you won't be able to take joy in the imperfection. And then the courage to be as oneself. The more centered you are, the more you will see how wonderful you are. You will be able to get past that guilt and condemnation and meaninglessness and emptiness and so forth, and a sense of death. Death will not be able to cancel out the joy you take in your existence. This sounds like Kohut. Sense of as you get more centered in yourself, according to Heinz Kohut. It's not just Jungian, in other words. Great psychoanalysts of different schools see this. Great spiritual masters see this. The more you are realized as a self, the more joy you have. The more vigor, more energy. But energy which is usable. I like to say to my analysans, what is our goal? I want you to be able to rock and roll and regulate. It's one thing to rock and roll and die, or not have the energy to rock and roll. But if this is the kind of a Tillichian vision, what do? What's possible? You can rock and roll and regulate so that you don't let the demonic destroy you. Your participation in the energy kill you. And so one of the things you got to ask yourself today is, which is my temptation? Is my temptation to not have the energy to rock and roll? In which case I got to really work on my connections to the power of being. Or is my tendency to rock and roll and jump off the cliff? In which case your problem is not your connection to the power of being. Your problem is learning to not let the creativity destroy the forms of your life. And so that's Paul Tillich in a nutshell. See? And if you understand this, then you can go back and read The Courage to Be again, and you can see that the huge foundation it's sitting on. It's not just standing out there by itself. That little book is the sort of the peak of the iceberg. Now let me take a few questions and let's go to lunch. Any questions or comments so far? We'll have lots of time this afternoon. Yeah.
I'm wondering about envy and its relationship to forms of anxiety. And I would pick out number 3, but I'm not sure it's necessarily only number 3.
You mean this one? Yeah. Well, see, one of the things and we'll get into this more this afternoon. One of the things that Tillich points out says, why do you need the courage to be? Because there are so many things trying to kill you. And the bad news is that not only are they from the outside, they're also from the inside. But there are forces that serve death and non-being all around you and inside you. And what is the courage to be? It is the actual capacity to take a stand against those things that are trying to kill you, whether they're outer or inner. Now, what's this got to do with envy and hate? There's a huge amount of envy and hate all around. And the bad news is, the better you get, the more of it's going to come at you. See, in other words, we have this nice, naive, as Tillich would say, dreaming innocence. Oh, if I get better, everybody will love me more. Wrong. You get better and you shine, the vampires line up around the block. And the good news about them is they just want to bite. You get really plugged into the power of being, you can feed a lot of vampires and not even bother you. You know, be good to those vampires. They need love too. But then there are those people that are not vampires. They don't want your blood. They just want you dead because they hate you and they don't think they participate in the power of being. That's why it is. The person eaten up with envy and hate, they think they're alienated.
Envy is a question, is a zero-sum game.
Yes.
Either you have it or you don't.
Yeah.
And the people that hate you are suffering from the non-being.
Yes. They sure are. They sure are. They really feel they're privileging non-being. They are telling themselves all sorts of things that they can't be. And they're so preoccupied with what you have that they can't think about what they've got. And the only answer to envy, say if you find yourself envy and hating, and we all do it sometime, you got to say, now where am I missing how wonderful I am? Because if you're preoccupied with envy and hate, it's about you're missing your own participation in all this wonderful reality. One more question, then we got to take our lunch break.
Could you speak a little bit more about what you were saying about vampires, like when you really start
Yes.
to achieve success?
Yes.
You might lose family members or friends.
Well, that's more related to the envy thing. It's like the vampire thing is, look, you got to understand, vampirism is a big psychological reality and spiritual reality. It's not just a myth. I mean, there is a myth. And you can read my friend Gordon Melton's wonderful books on the vampire and so on. But human beings that don't feel connected enough to the power of being assume a kind of vampiric stance toward others. That is, they watch for where energy appears. And instead of hating it, they want it. So I don't want to kill you. I just want you to let me come up and plug in. I want to be real close to you. Now what you will notice is it will look like, boy, this person really admires me. No, they idealize you. They don't admire you. They idealize you. And they see you as a source of energy, life energy. And you know what? They're right. To the extent that you're plugged in and you're shining, you have charisma, you have numinosity, you have vitality. To the extent that you have vitality, they're right. You're one of the places where the power of being manifests. You're one of the places where the fountain of being bubbles. You get that? I mean, you got to feel your way into that. To the extent that you really get to be who you can be, you're going to be a place where the fountain of being is bubbling forth. It may even be spurting. It may even be, just filling up the rooms. But the folks that have figured out how to plug in internally will be idealizing you, and they'll be trying to, that's what the idealizing transference is. Idealizing projections are all about this. So what you've got to do, be generous. If you're strong, be generous, and try to serve the needs of the sentient beings, as the Bodhisattva ideal says. But don't do so in such a way that you don't let them kill you. So, because they can kill you if you're inflated. And you've heard of burnout in therapists and clergy and spiritual directors and healers. Well, that comes not because they're hungry sentient beings, human and non-human, around. It's because they get inflated and they get to thinking they're the source. And so if you think you're the source, then you forget your spiritual practice. You forget to plug into your own fountain and be replenished so that you never let your energy get below a certain level. Okay, you had a question. One last question.
Yes. Given that you have fountain
Yes.
surgery in the bubble,
Mm-hmm.
and the vampires around you, that relationship, the way I see it, if we're talking about human relations, can't last, because if they're idealizing you, you can never
Well, it depends.
stay at that ideal
Right.
level.
Right. Well, let's put it this way. If transformation is possible in humans, then it is conceivable that if a person is related to in a human way, they may learn ways to connect to the energy without eating you. If I came to the conclusion that you were talking about there, I would not be an analyst, because I would be in despair about the possibilities of transformation. But one of the things any therapist has to learn is how to keep their energy from being depleted to terminal levels. So that is true in all relationships. There are going to be times when all of your relationships are going to have a lot of need for your energy. That is not demonic, that they have need for your energy. What is demonic is if you buy into a vision of your relationship where you are the source. You see? Do you understand what I'm saying there?
No, can you indulge me for another second?
Sure.
But we may not, I may not feel I'm a source, just to get that, talking about not but the other party, the vampire,
May feel
they
that.
feel it to the source.
Yeah, well, they do in an idealizing projection.
Exactly. So if you're replenishing and no longer that particular one, that whole thing can crumble. I'm not talking.
No, there's no question that that's not a stable place to stay.
Okay.
That's not a stable place to stay. But if you X out all the relationships where people are coming to you for energy, you're going to lose most of your friends. Think about it. And therefore, what I'm saying is it's not demonic to have somebody coming to you for energy. In fact, I want people to come to you for energy. The world is running on brownout. It's not all California. The whole world is browning out for lack of connection in a healthy way to this. So I want you to power up so that you don't have as much ambivalence about feeding. But if you're going to be able to do that, you have to be able to protect your self-identity. And in order to do that, you must regulate. You must not let somebody take more energy from you than you can spare. That's what we call boundaries. And that's what we say in codependency. You got to get to where you got a boundary, and you don't let the needs of the other person sink your boat. Now, I'm not minimizing how hard that is. I'm not minimizing that. You're right. Everything you're saying is right, except that the despair part. That is, you know what? It's up to you to set the boundary. Don't expect the other person to set the boundary. Never in any relationship. That is not their job. Friendship, marriage, love affairs, whatever. It is your job to set the boundary. That must not be relinquished to anyone else. And that's what having adequate self-identity means. And that's what having adequate individualization means. If without adequate individualization, as he said, remember that polarity, you will not form enough of a boundary to keep your participation with the other from serving death. Does that make sense? And of course, this is an ongoing project, right? I mean, the good news is that you can learn to regulate this. That's possible. But regulation is not perfection. You're going to be regulated this weekend, but next week you may give away too much. And then you're going to have to be awake. You can't go to sleep. You've got to stay awake. Say, well, I'm giving away too much now, and if I continue to do this, I'm going to hate that person that I love. So it's not kind to my partner to give them too much. If I give them too much, I'm going to hate them, and I'm going to be forced to blast away. Sorry about that. I'm going to be forced to blast away. You can see this in relationships all the time. A lot of relationship disorder is because people are not monitoring this consciously and realizing it's not the partner's fault. It's not the partner's fault. And we got to all understand, folks, we're all hungry. There's not any such thing as a non-hungry human being. And the question is, are we plugged up to the place where we can feed or not? I've got to stop for now. We'll come back. We're going to start as close to 1:30 as possible so we can finish this today. We'll go over all this again this afternoon in relationship to the transformation process. Thank you.
Discover your true masculine power through the king, warrior, magician, and lover archetypes, energies that have defined strong men for millennia. In just 5 minutes, this free test reveals which of your masculine energies are in balance and which need work. The result? Clear direction for your personal development and masculine empowerment. Thousands of men have gained insights to reshape their lives. Why not you? Take the Masculine Energy Indicator test now at masculinetest.com.